My memories of the raid of 1953 took place in Davis County in the Farmington area, where we lived with our father's family at that time. We had moved north 5 years earlier out of Old Short Creek, so most of the people in the work lived up in the Salt Lake area, and there was only a very small community left in Old Short Creek that was subject to the state of Arizona in the raid of 1953. I was 11 years old in 1953, and I remembered the announcement of that raid by the brethren, that there was a call to Dad, my father, and he told us that the community of Short Creek had been raided by the state police of Arizona, and the women and children had been taken into custody and the men put in jail. My chief memory of that was the terrible shock that I felt because of my sister Rose, my oldest sister Rose. She's 10 years older than I am, and she was married and living in Short Creek at that time, and we expected that she'd be taken away and we'd never see her again. So my personal memory of that is crying all night long because I wouldn't see her, but I wouldn't see my sister Ruth either, who was down taking care of my sister Rose. So that was my subjective experience. It wasn't happy. When I went to school the next fall, the talk of the raid was on the lips of all the school children there, and I didn't like it very well because of the things they said, and it was obvious that they said them because they heard them at home. And when I said I didn't like what they had to say and told them it wasn't true, then I was mobbed by a gang of little girls. They pushed me into a snowdrift, and I passed out there till the teacher showed up and took them off. So I have a very clear understanding of how people feel about us and the work of the Lord. And so I don't think I'm under a lot of illusions about that. The repercussions of the raid lasted all through the 50s, and it dispersed the people both in the north in Salt Lake City and northern Utah, as well as the people in the south, and it took most of the 50s to gather those people back through the efforts of the priesthood to both communities, both to the Short Creek community and the Salt Lake communities where the people lived. Since our family lived in the Salt Lake area, all the mothers were scattered at different areas of the western United States. And Dad had family in Denver. My mother's family was in Denver. He had family in Albuquerque, New Mexico, two ladies, Aunt Frances and Aunt Yvonne. He had a lady down in the Phoenix Mesa area, staying with Brother Johnson's family. And when he would go and travel to see all these families, it was 2,500 miles just to drive the trip, and he did it about every 4 months. And it was very wearing and difficult, and of course the families were deprived of his advice and counsel, his presence, and so they lived by faith. The ladies worked out in the world. They didn't contact him unless there was an absolute emergency, either by letter or by phone. And they worked and took care of their families and worked together and brought them up. And so it wasn't until the late 50s that the priesthood was able to gather all the people together again, and the brethren made that decision in the late 50s to open up this community and try to gather the people out of the world for the purpose of saving a generation of young people for the work of the Lord. And they were able to do that through two things. Through the Fireside program that began in the Salt Lake City area with a purpose of teaching the doctrines of the priesthood to the young people in that area that were growing up in the work. And in the Short Creek area to open this community up again to being built up and try to save the young people and gather all the families out of the world for the purpose of being taught by the priesthood and being able to live away from the influence of the world so we could live our religion in a more righteous way and not be contaminated by those influences. It took 7 years from 1953 until 1960 to gather most of the people together after that great persecution. The persecution was very great in Salt Lake City, but it was the greatest here in the Short Creek area, and it was devastating in the lives of the people here. There were many shattering emotional experiences for the children and the mothers, but they were very diligent and they were converted to the work they were doing of the fullness of the gospel. And so the ladies held firm, and they couldn't be bribed and coerced or intimidated into giving up their religion, and none of them did.
Yeah, that's great.